Hello, and welcome to FFRF's Ask an Atheist. I'm Dan Barker. I'm co-president of the Freedom from Religion Foundation. This week, we're going to get to know the newly appointed executive director of the American Humanist Association, an ally in church-state separation. And joining me in studio is FFRF staff attorney, Chris Line.
Hey.
Good to have you here, Chris.
Yeah, good to be here as always. And as always, we want to hear your thoughts on the topics we discussed today. So please leave your questions in the chat below or email them to askanatheist@ffrf.org. We'll try our best to answer your questions live during the show.
So joining us today is Fish Stark, who earlier this month was introduced as the new executive director of the American Humanist Association. Fish is also a lifelong humanist. So welcome to Ask an Atheist, Fish.
Thank you so much, Dan and Chris, for having me. I so appreciate the work that you all do at Freedom from Religion Foundation, and it's great to be here.
So when I saw your name, I looked up the word Fish as a name, first name, and it's like less than 5 people a year are named Fish. Do you know any of the others?
No, I know a lot of people with the last name Fish, like Nick Fish at American Atheists, and some of them will go by Fish as a nickname. But the people who have Fish as a first name were relatively few and far between. So I like being part of the secret club.
Oh, that's cool. Maybe later you can tell us how your parents gave you that name. But
well, it's funny. I was actually named Fortney Hellman Stark III after my father, who he went by Pete Stark his whole life, but his name was Fortney Hellman Stark Jr. And Fortney Hellman Stark III is kind of a rough name to have as a little kid, especially when you're going into first grade and you're a little boy who's not particularly good at sports and wears big tortoiseshell glasses and is a little bit feminine. I kept getting my butt kicked up and down the hallway, and I realized I could either learn to fight or change my name. And we were pretty committed pacifists in my family. So I started coming up with ideas for a new name. My initials were FHS. And when you looked at them all together, they looked like fish. And I was like, oh, wow, that sounds hip. I bet a kid named Fish doesn't get bullied. I was wrong about that, but I called myself Fish until it stuck.
Well, it's an arresting name.
Yeah, no, I was really excited when I saw that American Humanist Association had announced that they had a new director because, as most of our viewers will probably know, we've done a lot of work with the American Humanist Association over the years. We've taken lawsuits with them, collaborated on various projects, and obviously we've been really close partners in our fight protecting the separation of church and state. So it's great to see you in this new role and, to kind of explore what's going to be happening in the future and what possibilities there might be between our groups.
And most FFRF members would call themselves humanists, and many of them joined the AHA too.
Yeah, I mean, I'm a humanist. I mean, I tend to, because of what's going on in the world now, focus more on atheism because of some of the dangers of religion. But really, when you look at it, my real religion would be humanism.
Yeah.
And so, and as you said, that's true of a lot of our members, and a lot of the non-religious really have and in fact, not even the non-religious. I mean, to me, the best Christians, the best religious people are actually really humanists. They add that religious element on top, but at the core of what's good about what they believe and what they do, I think humanism is actually what they're practicing usually. So, it's great to have you on here. So, Fish, you seem to have quite an eclectic background. As a bit of an icebreaker, our viewers might have seen you perform stand-up comedy or appear on the Fox game show Snake Oil, which is kind of like Shark Tank, except the contestants have to guess which products are real and which are fake. So let's just start off today by just playing a clip from your appearance on that show.
Who are you going to question?
What are you leaning on?
I've got way more questions about Boost, I've got to say.
I think that's good.
Okay, Fish, which one is real?
I mean, I'm definitely going to want to listen a little more to Will this round. I didn't listen to Will before, and it got me in trouble. But more importantly, I think I believe Brian. I think I believe in Boost. I am locking it in.
So that must have been fun. And so you won some money too on that show.
Yeah, I did. Will Arnett and I teamed up and we won $40,000 trying to guess which things were real and which were snake oil. And I think we here have a refined sense for what is real and what is snake oil, and we're definitely seeing a lot of the latter right now.
Well, that's what both of our organizations are trying to do right now as well. So
yeah, couldn't have been a better person to be on the show, probably.
So tell us about your background. Were you raised religious, or were you raised as an activist, or what?
Yeah, so, my family was humanist. We didn't believe in God. We didn't go to church. We believed in a lot of things. We believed in trying to lift other people up and standing up for the underdog and the power of, when people work together to do something. But, on Sundays, we wouldn't go to church. If we had a Sunday tradition, it was in the election year, we'd go to the Union Hall and we'd get our walk packets and we'd go out and knock doors. I still got donuts, but I also got to go outside, so I felt like I was getting a pretty good deal as a kid. I didn't know the term humanism until I got to be about 13, but when I heard it, I realized that sort of what was the word, was the common identity and belief system for what my family had been practicing, and that's when it became my identity. I went on to be part of the student humanist group at Yale when Chris Stedman was running it, who was an incredible humanist minister. And now I'm really proud to be leading the great team over at the American Humanist Association. So
people might recognize your last name because your dad was a very well-known member of Congress, Pete Stark, and if I'm not mistaken, he was the first openly humanist member of Congress. Is that right?
He was the first one to openly say he didn't believe in a God. So back in 2007, I think the Secular Coalition for America offered a $1,000 prize to whoever could find the highest ranking non-believer in the government. And some enterprising person sent out a survey to as many people as he could get in touch with. 22 members of Congress at the time said they didn't believe in God, but 21 of them said you couldn't tell everyone. You couldn't tell anyone. And Dad was the one who said, well, I might as well be open and honest about what I believe, because obviously it's not the sort of thing that you should have a religious test for, and we should have people who are able to be open about their real views serving in government.
And he represented the Bay district in the Bay Area. Did that announcement hurt his chances politically?
No, not really. I mean, you had at one point, there was a challenger who tried to make hay about him voting against "In God We Trust" as the national motto. But the truth is, he represented one of the most religiously diverse districts in the country. It had a large population of immigrants both from Latin America and from Asia. So you had Hindus, Sikhs, Catholics, Jews, so many religions represented. And so folks didn't seem to care one way or the other what he believed, as long as he was respecting everyone else's right to practice.
Yeah, we've seen that from people even now. Jared Huffman, the humanist, the non-religious congressman, and a lot of others. I know that Hemant Mehta, the Friendly Atheist, recently put out a whole list of all the non-religious people running throughout the entire country. And what he noted, I think this is important and related to what you were just saying, was that they're not really facing that pushback. Like, you're not really seeing in their races that people are like, hey, this is an atheist or this is a non-religious person running. Like, that's not really coming up as a major point in the elections that they're in, which is obviously huge, and hopefully can allow more of our officials to come out in the way that your dad did and be open about their real beliefs.
And Jared Huffman actually did better in this next election. He was the second district just north of where your dad was, right? He announced it, and then he actually did better.
Yeah.
Right. So, and I want to give credit to Ron Millar at the AHA's Center for Free Thought Equality, who prepared that list of humanist electeds that Hemant uses. We spend part of our work that we do through our lobbying arm is we do a survey of state and local elected officials, and we try and maintain not just a list of folks who believe the way we do, but make sure that we're providing resources to support secular elected officials through the Center for Free Thought Equality PAC. So that's some work that we've been doing for a while. And it's not just because it's important that we have representation. It's because humanists tend to make damn good policy. I mean, Jared Huffman is an incredible champion for religious liberty. He's also an incredible champion for the environment. right? Jamie Raskin, who identifies as both Jewish and humanist, does incredible work protecting our democracy, but also just introduced a great bill on mental health. Because when you start from the presumption that everyone matters, everyone has dignity, and that we should use facts and reason to guide policy, not reach back ceaselessly into the past, but move forward, you end up with solutions that really help people.
Yeah, and that exposure, that pointing out these people is so important, because then even people who maybe aren't non-religious, they start to lose their biases. They start to look and they go, you know what? All these non-religious leaders, your Jared Huffmans, Jamie Raskins, like, I actually agree with pretty much everything they're saying. And then they start to realize, like, oh, actually, I prefer the non-religious candidates, the non-religious politicians across the country are the ones really doing the important work and trying to really help people. And that's so important. So just ask Fish, what exactly brought you to the American Humanist Association? Like, you're a humanist, but how did you end up, taking this position with the organization?
Yeah, so I've been working for the last decade in what I would call applied humanism. I've been an educator. I've worked in nonprofits. I've worked with tech startups, really focusing on healthy youth development and how do we build positive mental health in young people. So for a long time, I was the director of programs at a nonprofit that trained and funded youth activists around the world, helped empower young people to solve, whether it was young people in rural Kenya trying to start the first sex ed program their village had ever had, young people in Nepal doing earthquake recovery. I moved from there to work at a tech startup where I was building basically apps that helped young people develop positive mental health, which we know is a big issue right now. My work has always been about helping people feel that they belong and believe in themselves and do good. And that's what humanism calls us to do. So I'm approaching it from the perspective of, obviously I've always done a little bit of political work, because sometimes when you've got a family business, it's hard to pull away from it. But also, really, part of what the AHA wants to do in this new era is be really clear about what humanists do believe and how people can find meaning and purpose through living their humanism.
So some of our viewers might not know what humanism is. How would you define it?
That's a great question. So there are lots of different expressions of humanism. We've got everyone from John Dewey to Kurt Vonnegut to Kristen Bell to Joyce Carol Oates. They might all define it differently, but the common thread is that humanists believe in people. We believe that everybody's got inherent and limitless worth and dignity. We believe that people are really capable, that there's really no problem we can't solve and no truth we can't uncover if we are able to collaborate and if we've got the space to think freely. And we believe that everyone ought to have the freedom to live and believe as they choose rather than be controlled by somebody else's belief system. So those are the things that have united humanists for a long time. It's something where, as Chris said, there are many people of faith who have humanist beliefs. Humanism as a belief system really is there for folks who are non-religious who want something positive to believe in. And we've got, luckily, millions of people who identify with humanism. We're hoping to get more of those people to be members of the AHA.
I like to think that while non-belief or atheism or agnosticism are the negative side of the coin, it's what we don't believe. The positive flip side is what we do believe is humanism. And so I would call myself both, because as you live your life and act out your values, instead of saying God is the measure of right and wrong or values, humans are the measure.
So I would say the same. I call myself both, and I would also call myself a Unitarian, and we have some folks with us who call themselves Quakers or Buddhists or Jews. The great thing is humanism is big enough to encompass people who come from lots of different places. But as you said, we've got this shared belief that empathy is the source of moral truth and rationalism is the source of empirical truth. That we don't need a book from the past to tell us what to believe. We can learn from each other and learn from the natural world and build a belief system based on that.
Yeah, that's great. And so more specifically, I guess, what is the mission of American Humanist Association, and what are some of the passions you plan to bring to the organization?
Yeah, so the American Humanist Association has been around for over 80 years. It was started actually as a journal after the conference in Chicago in the late 1930s where philosophers like John Dewey came together with Reform rabbis and Unitarian ministers to sort of conceive of and establish humanism. Over the last 80 plus years, we've worked to do a few things. One is increase public awareness of humanism, both so that folks who are religious understand that you can actually be a good person without believing in God. We break the taboo, but also so that folks who are not religious see that they've got something to believe in and belong to. They don't need to be alone. We've worked to help train through our Humanist Society hundreds of humanist celebrants and chaplains who help people, whether they're navigating and celebrating a wedding or they're on death row. We're there to provide the same kind of support in a secular way that a religious chaplain might provide. And of course, we've spent a lot of time defending the rights of humanism and the non-religious. So we play a lead role in helping coordinate the Congressional Free Thought Caucus, which has got now 24 members of Congress, many of whom are people of faith, but who are committed to restoring secular principles. That's what Jared Huffman and Jamie Raskin lead. And of course, we've got a legal center that has worked for a long time, litigated in front of the Supreme Court to protect the First Amendment, to protect the Establishment Clause, to protect church-state separation, which is increasingly under fire from, the Christian nationalist right.
Humanism is worldwide. I was just in Oslo last month to meet with the Norwegian humanists, and as you know, they're the largest group in the world. I think they have more than 100,000 members, and they do marriages and ceremonies and, not like confirmation, but youth ceremonies. And they have chaplains in the military and in hospitals. And as you say, they're meeting this basic human need for meaning and community in a natural way, not in some supernatural way. So the AHA is apparently doing very similar things. What about, besides the positive stuff, what about confronting things like Christian nationalism? Does the AHA take a stance on that?
Absolutely. So we abhor Christian nationalism because, let's put it simply, humanists believe that everyone's got the freedom of conscience and that nobody else can tell you what to believe or how to behave based on their religious law. And that's a principle we share with a lot of religious folks. I've got Christian friends and Jewish friends and Muslim friends, and they don't want to make me eat kosher. They don't want to, put their religious restrictions onto me. But we've got a small minority of people who are trying to weasel their way into high-powered positions in the government and push the Project 2025 agenda on America, which functionally would privilege religious institutions and subject them to religious law. And this has been, obviously, as we know, going on for decades. There have always been people since the founding who believed that the American innovation of church-state separation was a bad idea and have been trying to undermine it. These people have become more emboldened than before. So we've been responding to that, as long as we've been around. But we've got some, I hope to talk about this later in the call, some exciting initiatives that we're running between now and the election to make sure people are aware of Project 2025 and white Christian nationalism before they go to vote.
Yeah, that's in particular a good point that I have learned relatively recently, that the fact that Christian nationalism literally was around at the time of our founding, while the majority of everyone came together and said, hey, I may be religious, and then there were the deist founders and stuff, and they decided we would have this secular nation. There were amongst them some founders who really did want us to be a Christian nation, and they did not obviously win out. And that's important to point out, I think, because it's not just simply that, back then, Christianity wasn't as popular, and so they didn't really have an option to make it a Christian nation, and that's why it was a secular nation. No, the same forces were there trying to do it, but the majority correctly created a secular nation where everyone, whether you're Christian or not, would be a part of our society. So I always kind of view America almost like the humanist, almost like the humanist version of a country in the world where, obviously we supported we the people, aka humanism, as opposed to either a theocracy with a god or like the divine right of kings or something. It's so I just feel this. I've always thought there was this big connection between sort of humanism and America as a secular democracy.
Well, the point is, back then they acknowledged it, they confronted it, they debated it, and then they rejected it.
Right.
Right. Well, Christian nationalists would like to write their own version of history, but the funny thing about history is you can't make it up. It already happened. So we have events we can point to, like the fact that Benjamin Franklin called for a prayer at the Constitutional Convention and everybody ignored him. There wasn't even a vote. And Benjamin Franklin didn't even think we should be a Christian nation. He just thought we should have a prayer to calm things down. We didn't have a single group prayer at the Constitutional Convention. If that's not a declaration that we're not a religious nation, I don't know what is. One of my favorite speeches from the founders on religious liberty is when George Washington went to visit a Jewish congregation in Newport, Rhode Island, partway into his 2 terms as president. And he talked about the importance of toleration. And he quoted from the Bible. He said, "Everyone shall sit under his own vine and fig tree, and there shall be none to make him afraid." And he was talking about the kind of stuff people are trying to do now, the people who are trying to interfere in and push their religion on other people. It was significant that he said that at a Jewish congregation because these were people who had fled to the United States because they were being persecuted in Europe. And George Washington and the founders knew the kind of small-mindedness and the kind of tyranny that religious states wrought on people and the way they closed the mind, and they decided that they wanted something different. I mean, we fought a war to get away from it. Why would we go back now?
Yeah, right. And they're always picking out just those things like that where it's like, oh, one time Thomas Jefferson said something that wasn't anti-religious, so clearly it's the other big thing that they do, and we catch this all the time, is, as we know, a lot of the founders were deists. They used broad language, our creator, and things like that. Sure. And the Christian nationalists go, see, they were Christians. They said creator. They mentioned a God. They take any reference to religion, no matter how generic or non-Christian, and say, well, clearly they were Christians because, our creator, that must
some
be,
of them were, but yeah.
Right. Well, that's what, that's the argument from Christian nationalists. We catch it all the time.
Yeah.
So,
yeah.
So and we were kind of preparing for this. I was looking through your, your history, what you've done, and there's some things, amazing things in your background, but some things you can kind of gloss over. It was like, oh, Harvard, okay, yeah, Yale, whatever. But I think the things that I found most interesting were, A, your young age and the fact that you've done so much work in your career with students. You've worked as a teacher, helped students develop critical thinking skills, and prevent bullying. Do you intend on connecting young students to the AHA? Because I think that, to me, is the thing that makes me most excited about you, is just having a much younger leader who can hopefully, we know that the youngest generation is the most non-religious, that we have. And how do we get them into our movement? How do we get them working with us? And what do you and AHA plan to do with that?
This is what I'm most excited to talk about, because you're right, Chris. My generation is coming of age, less religious than ever before, but more starved for purpose and meaning and community. And if you want to talk about snake oil, we can talk about the fact that there are people coming to these young people, especially young men, who are looking for something to believe in and selling them the lie that the way you feel strong and the way you feel purposeful and the way you feel in control when your life feels out of control is by acting like you're better than other people, joining these right-wing movements that are about putting other people down and saying that we're actually the tough and strong ones and that these things are our birthright. Talk about a deeply mendacious lie. And humanism has been for a long time the alternative to that point of view that says, you know what, if you don't have a religious belief system, there's something you can believe in. And actually, we believe that lifting other people up, believing in other people, and being fair and honest and kind is what makes you strong and gives you a sense of meaning and stability in your life. And so that is a big part of what I've, again, worked with tech startups. And, when I was working in the nonprofit world, I worked with folks like the Red Cross and Lady Gaga's foundation to build youth empowerment programs. There's a way to share these truths with young people. And we're going to be working through our education center, but also through our communications initiatives to make sure that, everyone wants somewhere to belong and something to believe in. And humanism ought to be providing that for young people far more than it is.
You sound like your dad.
Well, he did raise me. I learned from the best.
He he prepared a video for one of our conferences a few years ago, and it was really special to have, right after he kind of came out publicly, you know. So I doubt that he did stand-up. You do stand-up, right?
I do a little bit of stand-up comedy. So I started out when I was in college. And I then, after a while, I moved to West Virginia for a few years, and I didn't hunt, fish, or go to church. And I worked remotely, so I was not making a lot of friends. And there was one bar in town where they did stand-up comedy every other week, and I did it every single second and fourth Wednesday of the month until I became half decent at it. So a little while ago, I won the funniest person in Savannah competition. Here in the DMV, I'm part of an interfaith comedy troupe, so they get grants to go to houses of worship, and they always have a Christian, a Muslim, a Jew, and an other on the bill. And I'm often the other, talking about being a Unitarian and being a humanist.
Do you think you can use comedy to promote humanism?
I think so. In fact, I think there are a lot of things that are kind of funny about humanism, right? Including the fact that it's pretty, all of the misconceptions people have of us, right? I'm just going to be like, oh, I'm going to go sacrifice my goat today. There is, people construct these myths in their heads about what humanists believe, and sometimes making fun of people's wrongful perception of you, especially if you can do it in sort of a happy way and show how normal you are, is funny. So of course I'm working on a few jokes for when I start going on the road. My favorite one, I think I mentioned to you all before the broadcast, my girlfriend is a secular Jew. So what do you call it when a secular humanist Unitarian and a secular Jew get married? You call it an interfaithless marriage.
Interfaithless. That's good.
Yeah, well, I'll just say he doesn't do stand-up, but Dan loves to tell jokes at various events at FFRF. And
After the show, let's compare notes.
Yeah, yeah.
We're gonna have to work on our sets and make sure we don't crib from each other too much. That's amazing.
Yeah, no, I definitely agree, though, that I think that is one advantage we have in the non-religious community is, I guess, an ability to have more humor than sort of, religion tends to get very serious very quick. We found that even looking at like Christian movies tend to not be funny, or have good writing. Like all the best writers, every time I look at them, tend to be non-religious. So obviously that's a big advantage we have in our community. So I guess to kind of start wrapping up here, how do you see the future of the humanist movement evolving in America?
Well, I think you pointed it out early on in the broadcast, right? There are huge demographic shifts going on in America right now. You've got more than ever. It went, I think, from like 23% a few years ago to close to 28% now of Americans identify as sort of nothing in particular. And the group where that identification is highest is Americans under 30, but actually the growth is fastest among Americans 30 to 45. So it's not just, the college kids and the people becoming adults today. This is, it's broadening. The fact that folks are just finding that traditional religion, and again, no offense to people who still find this true for themselves, but more and more folks are finding that traditional religion doesn't provide what they're looking for in terms of the community, the meaning, the belief system. And so the future of humanism is reaching out to that 28% and growing and say, hey, if you want something to belong to and something to believe in, you don't need to find some podcaster on Instagram who's just talking about whatever they saw that day. Like, we have for decades and decades been writing and researching and advocating and figuring out how people can live ethically and live happily and take good care of others. We're the tradition of John Dewey, who created American public schools, of Gloria Steinem, who inspired modern feminism, of the founders of the reproductive rights movement. All of these things that probably a lot of these people already believe in were humanist ideas. And so if we can make that connection for people, that not only do they need a space to believe in, but actually a lot of the things they already believe in came from humanism, and we give them something to participate in that's meaningful. Like we don't right now have an online community, and young people, build online community rather than meeting up, in person in church basements these days. So we're going to be, laying out new programs that help people get connected and make that meaning in better ways.
Wow. So you've been the CEO of American Humanist Association for less than a month, and it looks like you're hitting the ground running there, Fish.
Well, trying to. And the one thing I want to make sure I share before I go is recently we launched the Democracy, Not Theocracy campaign. It's a campaign that we're running to make sure voters are informed about Project 2025 before they go to the polls. We're hiring democracy defense fellows on college campuses in swing states, young humanists who can tell their peers about Project 2025, because 42% of young people say they don't know enough to have an opinion. We've got humanists mailing postcards to swing states. We're going to be posting about what's actually in Project 2025 all up through the election. So if folks want to learn more, they can go to americanhumanist.org/democracy, not theocracy. We're providing lots of different ways for people to take part.
Yeah, we'll go ahead and put that link in our description here down on this too, so that they can get that directly.
So we do have some questions, and also somebody submitted some jokes. But
let's hear them.
Well, let's do the jokes first, and then we'll go to the question. Somebody, it doesn't say who sent this. I swallowed a bottle of invisible ink. I'm now in the emergency room waiting to be seen.
Ah.
No?
Very clever.
That's good.
Okay. Someone else sent this one. I once skipped school to go bungee jumping. I got suspended. That's like a dad joke. Well,
That's clever.
Okay, so here's a serious question. What are the main differences between the AHA and other similarly situated groups, such as FFRF, Americans United, and such?
So I don't necessarily want to speak for any other group. I will say the AHA has long had a focus on some things that other groups definitely do, like political and legal work to prevent, again, forced belief or people inserting religion into government. But we've also, for a long time, been, really providing quasi-religious structures for folks who need them. So again, we certify chaplains who work in hospitals, in prisons, and we certify people who can perform weddings. We've got master's level programming that you can apply as credits towards a master's in divinity for folks who want to learn about and study humanist thought through our Center for Education. And of course, like a lot of folks, we have magazines and publications, and ours really focus on what does it mean to be a humanist? If you don't believe, what can you believe in? What can you do to find this kind of meaning in your life and practice it?
Yeah. So, our group focuses mainly on state-church separation, and we do educate the public about non-believers. But we do have a debaptismal certificate.
Huh.
If you've been baptized and you want to be unbaptized, we actually can send you a free one if you want. So you can give one of them to your church and say, "Hey, I'm unbaptized now." So, and some people actually do that.
How do people react to that?
Well, I don't know how their churches react, but I know some people get two of them. They frame one and then they send one to their church. Please take me off the rolls, because and some of them were baptized when they were children. So what meaning was there in that? But so there's one final question. I think you've kind of touched on it, but maybe you have some more thoughts. What are your priorities for moving AHA into the future?
Well, a couple of things. The first is we want to figure out the path forward for our legal center. So right now we're working with outside attorneys to move forward the cases like the one we just won against the city of Ocala. You think it wouldn't be controversial to say the police department can't hold a public Christian prayer vigil using government resources and on government time, and the judge agreed with us, but the right still wants to keep litigating it. We've got an incredible legal advisory committee forming with folks from the ACLU and labor and of course the secular space helping us think about the future of that work. We're going to be doing a lot more affirmative communication about humanism, again, geared towards new humanists, young people, folks leaving religion, looking for something. And one of the things that I'm particularly passionate about, I lived in West Virginia for several years. I ran a mentorship program for high school kids in Boone County. And you get to see, when you live in a very rural area, just how much some folks who may not believe feel like they have to believe or they're going to get cut off from their social systems. So doing something to make sure that humanists in rural areas feel that they're not alone, but also religious folks in rural areas understand, hey, we're just like everyone else. We just have different beliefs about what happens after we die.
Yeah, well, this discussion with you, Fish, has left me feeling very good about future of AHA, and hopefully we at FFRF will be collaborating a lot with you, and we'll both be working into the future to protect the separation of church and state, fight off Christian nationalism, things like that. So thank you again, Fish, for coming onto our show this week. How can people follow the work you're doing at the American Humanist Association?
Absolutely. So folks can go to AmericanHumanist.org to follow us, to become a member. If you become a member, you get access to our programming at discounted rates. You get free copies of our magazine, and you support the work we're doing to defend church-state separation. They can follow us on social. We're on Facebook, Instagram, even Twitter, even though Elon Musk is being a little annoying today. I know we've both been arguing with him. At, again, American Humanist Association. So thank you guys. And Chris, I agree. I really hope that we get to continue working closely together. The work that you all do is something that we at the AHA really respect. And it's going to take all of us working as one to protect these freedoms when the radical Christian right seems determined to defeat them.
Definitely.
And I think all of us can say, instead of saying amen, we can all say, aha. AHA.
Aha.
Good one.
Well, thanks.
Hell yeah.
So, well, thanks for joining us. And this wraps up this week's episode of FFRF's Ask an Atheist. A new episode of our broadcast TV show, which is called Free Thought Matters, airs this weekend. And FFRF co-president Annie Laurie Gaylor and I are talking with Kate West, author of the harrowing new book, Rift, a memoir of breaking away from Christian patriarchy.
The stay-at-home daughter is part of this whole idea of Christian patriarchy, or the Quiverful movement, where girls are meant to become wives and mothers. So in that world, it doesn't make sense for them to leave home, to go to college, to have a career, because that just teaches them independence and how to think for themselves. So the best way to get them to stay in that lifestyle is to keep them at home and train them how to be household keepers. And so I stayed home and I was learning how to do a grocery budget, and my father would send me out to homeschool other people's children and do things that followed this idea of mothering and nurturing.
Yeah, she was 24 and still living under her father's thumb at home. You can watch that episode on FFRF's YouTube channel.
And don't miss our weekly radio show, Free Thought Radio. This week, Dan and Annie Laurie Gaylor will speak with Tia Levings, author of the book A Well-Trained Wife, My Escape from Christian Patriarchy. You can find Free Thought Radio at ffrf.org/radio or wherever you get your podcasts.
And be sure to check out the latest episode of We Dissent, the only podcast hosted exclusively by women attorneys, free thought attorneys who are constitutional lawyers discussing state-church separation. You can subscribe to We Dissent wherever you get your podcasts, or check it out online at we-dissent.org.
Finally, if you want more information about the Freedom from Religion Foundation, you can do so at our website, ffrf.org. If you're a member already, thank you. If not, please join us, and we will see you next time on FFRF's Ask an Atheist.